I declare that those proposed payments are now open for examination, and I call on the Minister to make an opening statement should he wish.
Thank you, Chair. I won't do a long opening statement, but I'll just have a few words to say. I'll first introduce my colleagues who are in the chamber with me. Rick Purse is the Chief Executive of the Department for Education, to my right. Immediately behind are Chris Bernardi, the Chief Financial Officer, and Ben Temperley, the Chief Operating Officer of the department. Behind them are Dr Carolyn Crozabalo, the Executive Director for Early Years and Child Development, who also has responsibility for support services within the Department for Education, and Dr Peter Smith, who is the Executive Director for Strategic Policy and External Relations. Julianne Rienstra has been the COO for the Department for Education or similar roles for an extended period of time. Her role today is being filled by Ben Temperley, who has newly taken on this role. Julianne has retired to spend a retirement well-earned, full of joy, no doubt, and chairing the board of Zoos SA, among other roles, for which I'm sure she'll do a great job. She served in estimates hearings from Rob Lucas through to myself, every education minister in these hearings. And indeed from Greg Crafter to myself. She's provided excellent service to ministers and, most importantly, the children and young people, the schools, preschools and other child education settings. So I just know that Julianne would hate to be the centre of attention, but I couldn't let an estimates hearing go by without drawing radical attention to her absence. We will feel her presence in spirit, if not here, and I'm sure that she's watching. It's very unlikely, actually.
Sure.
But if she is watching, I'm sure she'll be providing Ben with advice as the day goes on. I thank you for the opportunity to make an opening statement to members of the committee, and I'm sure all members of the committee will join with me in expressing our wholehearted thanks and admiration to all of the teachers, the support staff in education, everybody who contributes to our children's education, particularly at a time of extraordinary disruption as we've had in the last couple of weeks. And it's notable that, of course, every family in South Australia has joined in that mission in the last week and a half in a more hands-on way than many of them are used to. And I'm sure they have been right at the front of appreciating our kids being able to get back to school yesterday. It's really noteworthy that yesterday our early figures, and there are not every school and site has reported in, but our early figures suggest that we're only about 1 or 2% below regular attendance at schools, and of course 1% of our student population or thereabouts are learning at home, mostly because they're directed into quarantine or by SA Health or in similar circumstances. So there's no doubt that everyone is happy to be back at school. There is no doubt, however, that it was an enormously positive and successful body of work undertaken by our educators and our families and our students to ensure that there was continuity of learning during the week of lockdown. Some staff and students, as I say, do remain in directed quarantine, including those at Gawler and District B to 12 College and indeed many at Westminster School. They're being supported to learn and work from home as appropriate by their schools, particularly for the students and the staff at Westminster and Gawler and District B to 12 College. As Minister for Education, I'd like to thank them for what is actually a fairly significant sacrifice they're making, but they're making it on behalf of the people of South Australia because the work of the difficulties that are associated with being in quarantine are, of course, for our community safety, for their families' safety, for our state's safety, and to enable our state to open up. We are very grateful for what they're going through, and we look forward to them resuming their education at school. Throughout the lockdown, all sites, unless they've been closed, in a case such as Gawler, have been open to the children of essential workers and to children in vulnerable situations. The department has taken the posture that no child would be turned away who needs to be at a school during this pandemic. Important health and safety measures are in place while we transition out of lockdown to ensure that we are able to reopen our schools and our preschools, but in a way that SA Health is satisfied that they COVID safe. So that includes face masks for adults when indoors, except when teaching or engaging with students, face masks for students in years 8 and above when they're inside, minimising non-essential visitors to sites, and certainly for now, a pause on excursions and school activities that are not part of the school curriculum. This is in addition to important baseline COVID-safe measures that are in place consistently, like QR check-in, physical distancing for adults, and staying home if unwell. We've refined and well-tested closure protocols in place to respond to confirmed cases, and we'll work lockstep in with SA Health and SAPOL to implement them. This lockdown and the previous Parafield outbreak have demonstrated the effectiveness of the extensive planning undertaken by schools, preschools and the department to respond to constantly changing conditions. The system is able to move quickly and efficiently to remote learning and quickly return to face-to-face learning. We'll continue to prepare for future events and ensuring learning continuity is maintained. And I want to pay credit to the professionalism of our staff across all sites. Their service and the work of our services has been outstanding in response to the pandemic. I think the work done by Education Head Office in supporting those sites and keeping our workforce and our community informed has been terrific. I'd like to thank the non-government school sectors for being lockstep in with the government throughout not just this lockdown but throughout the pandemic. In other jurisdictions, that collaboration has not been as close, and I think that it has been to the benefit of our children that whether children are in a government school site or a non-government school site, they're hearing basically the same messages from their principals, from their systems, and that makes things a lot less confusing. Our parents continue to work alongside us to keep our community safe and our students learning, and I thank them and pay credit to them for that.
Thank you, Minister. I'd just like to add some remarks. So we have been provided advice from the Deputy Clerk around the wearing of masks during estimates committees. Masks should be worn by all persons who are able to do so when in Parliament House. This includes during estimates committee. With the exception of a range of circumstances, one of which is when the visibility of your mouth and clear enunciation is important. For example, ministers who are participating in committees and need to have clear enunciation for Hansard and broadcast purposes. I leave that to members to interpret, but do note that pre-existing health conditions are and remain something that should be respected and taken into consideration when somebody is looking to potentially not wear a mask during these circumstances. But I appreciate members' cooperation in ensuring that the guidelines are adhered to as best as possible. Member for Wright, would you wish to make an opening statement?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. And just some very brief opening remarks to reiterate the words of the Minister in congratulating Julianne Rienstra on her remarkable career. I worked very closely with her in my previous role as a Chief of Staff and Advisor to Education Ministers, and she has provided advice of the highest calibre to governments of both persuasions for a very long time. I'm sure she'll be missed in the agency greatly, and on behalf of the opposition, wish her all the well for her life after the Education Department, which she has very well deserved, and also just to reiterate also the comments of the Minister and thank all our school staff who are yet again have found themselves in a uncertain environment, I guess, and having to deal with a lockdown and prepare classes for online learning and at-home learning. And as the parent of 3 young kids who did a fair bit of homeschooling, or tried, mostly unsuccessfully last week and this week to do homeschooling with my kids. What was prepared was of a really high quality, and the engagement from the teachers, I think, was excellent. And on behalf of the people I represent, but more broadly as the Shadow Education Minister, we do acknowledge the situation that they find themselves in, and again, we ask so much of them when other people might be working from home. They are back on the front line caring for our children, including my own, and I thank them greatly for that.
With opening statements now complete, I call on questions. The member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, if we could start Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 185, and highlights. And I thought I'd kick-start with some questions about COVID. So I understand that the TGA has now approved vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds. Has the department done any planning or work around preparation for how vaccines might be delivered to that cohort or demographic, given that they will almost exclusively be in our schools or in government or non-government schools?
I might ask the Chief Executive to respond directly.
The vaccine rollout is being coordinated by SA Health, as you're aware, and at this stage, planning for rollout for students hasn't occurred beyond recognising that it will need to happen. The changes, and I note only this morning that New South Wales has prioritised Pfizer for their Year 12s. So as that supply frees up, I'm confident that we will be able to connect in with SA Health's vaccine rollout team to facilitate that. We are obviously in constant sort of contact with our colleagues in other jurisdictions regarding their plans, and we'll be kind of sharing different experiences with them. But at this stage, there's no documented plan on that. But as soon as there is, we'll be keen to socialise it so people are clear.
Minister, on the same budget line, the same topic, I refer to the Chief Executive's answer there, is Pfizer vaccinations for our Year 12 something that we are consider or will consider possibly?
That was confirmed. That would be a matter for SA Health to give further advice on.
Same budget line again, Minister. Has any money been set aside by your agency in preparation for possibly being involved with, in some way, with SA Health's, I guess, rollout of vaccinations for the 12 to 15 year age group?
I'll invite the Chief Executive to comment.
We haven't designated a budget line as yet because we haven't not clear on the quantum. Also, SA Health and the Commonwealth funding lines will need to be factored into that. But obviously, as we've dealt with different elements that have come up throughout the pandemic response, like the increase in cleaning and so on, we would do our best to centrally fund those so that costs wouldn't impact on schools. So while we haven't got a final position on that, because we haven't got the overall cost, let alone the sources of funds, my expectation is that would not be something that schools would be expected to fund within their existing budget envelope.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, same budget line again. How many masks have been provided to each government high school for students, and was the initial delivery based on how many students there were, or did every school get the same amount regardless of their school populations?
I'll see if we've got the number of masks that have been provided while I'm giving some reflections. Masks were provided to schools on the basis of their size, with I assume some sort of ratio that was determined on that, but I know that a large school, like schools of over 1,000, received very, very many masks. The Port Neale Primary School, with fewer than a dozen students, obviously would receive correspondingly a very small number of masks for the staff, given no students would be required to wear the masks in a primary school setting. So there was reflection given to how many people on site, and we believe that we have provided a very generous allocation to sites on the basis that certainly the experience has been in the last 24 hours, of course, and we anticipated, but many children are coming to school with their own masks. We're expecting mask use to be more prevalent in the community. It has become more prevalent in the community in recent times, and many people now have their own cloth masks, or indeed their own supply of surgical masks, as you see around the room today, a mix, and that mix is in our schools as well. So we have provided, we believe, enough masks for the short term, and that there is more available to schools if there are needed. We anticipate potentially some schools will be in a situation where very many of their masks may not be needed, in which case I think they've got a 3-year expiry date, and potentially if schools are left with more than they need for an extended period of time, we'll collect them and keep them in storage. I'll just check whether Ben has got the detail that I was referring to earlier. I'm advised that we've delivered a bit over 1 million masks to schools. There have been 2 deliveries during the most recent period. There was some site-specific deliveries last year, when, of course, we had the Theberton issue, I recall, and there was also now a new Microsoft form that schools can order more from head office if they are needed. Just 1 second. Data, just a bit over 2.7 million masks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your answer, Minister. On the same budget line and the same issue around supply of masks. So 2.7 million masks supplied. How long is it intended that that stock will last? Is that, you're hopeful, I guess, from that answer that that will be enough to get the schools through this period?
Thank you, sir, for that question. We identified masks as a suitable preemptive kind of risk management strategy, and had masks delivered to all sites throughout public education many months ago. And that was largely so that parents, students or staff who felt more comfortable wearing a mask would have access to them. We have a fantastic relationship with SA Health's distribution centre, who have almost limitless supply of masks, and our distribution centre, which the honourable member would be aware of at Torrensville there, who've done such an extraordinary job throughout this, has many millions of masks in stock, and an almost 24-hour arrangement with SA Health to be able to top that up. Obviously now with the health advice or the health requirement that students in secondary schools should be wearing masks, we're now prioritising the masks out to our area schools and our secondary settings. You will have seen in the media Theberton Senior College receiving many boxes of masks. And I'd also like to, if I may, just acknowledge Cochrane's Transport, who have been exemplary in assisting us in distributing this, but our distribution network has done great work. As the Minister said, we have a very proactive approach to mask supply or any other hygiene products, hand sanitiser, soap, tissues or anything else. And our schools know that they just need to let us know, and we can prioritise that. In addition, we've made an offer to our colleagues in the independent and Catholic system that if any school was at risk of not being able to operate due to a shortage of masks or so on, that we'd be able to help them out. So I'm extremely confident in our mask supply. But as the Minister said, what we're seeing is it's a bit hard to estimate, but nearly half the kids and staff wearing their own cotton masks.
Can I just add that certainly my observation is that estimate of half wearing their own cotton masks, it's only growing, and it's only likely to grow as people choose to wear their own.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that this one you may need to take on notice, but do you know, or any of your departmental advisors know the percentage of frontline workers, teachers, SSOs, other support staff who are aged under 40?
What I can provide the member with is an estimate that our department has generated, and it's a pretty accurate estimate of 75% of our staff being eligible for the vaccination. That's a combination of obviously all South Australians over 40 eligible for vaccination, plus all South Australians in regional areas, or all of our workforce in regional areas are eligible today to get the vaccination and are able to do so on making a booking. Now, in relation to the relevance for eligibility for vaccination, that 75% figure is applicable. I don't have a specific figure in relation to 40, but there was some work done in relation to the age of 45, for what it's worth, and 49.7% of our workforce is aged 45 and over. In addition to that, obviously, there's another age between 40 and 45 and all of the regional adults aged under 40 being eligible, and some people obviously in vulnerable cohorts who are also eligible. Also, hang on a second. And also people working in disability settings, and I think the hospital school as well.
Thanks, Minister. The same budget line again, and in reference to your answer there, that it's roughly 75% of the workforce eligible for the vaccine. Do we keep track of how many of those have actually had their vaccination? Is that kept by the department so they have an idea of how many of the eligible people are receiving it or have received it?
We are talking about setting up a voluntary survey for staff to notify the department whether they've been fully vaccinated or indeed had their first or second jabs. That's proposed to be a voluntary survey.
Thanks, Minister. Same budget line again. Do you support all frontline educators being added to the priority vaccination program?
South Australians being vaccinated. Certainly, we don't second guess the advice provided by SA Health and Professor Spurrier. As a government, I think that we're in a position where SA Health has done an extraordinarily good job. I am keen for all teachers to be vaccinated as quickly as possible and all education staff to be vaccinated as quickly as possible. I urge everyone who's eligible at the moment, that being, of course, the 3/4 of the population determined as certainly according to age at greater risk, to get vaccinated if they're eligible now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Moving on to the capital works and transition of Year 7 into high school, and I think budget reference page 186 under targets. Minister, you've stated on a number of occasions that all building works required for the start of the Year 7 in high school transition next year will be ready. Is that still your position? Do you stand by those comments?
So the short answer is yes, I do. The challenge, obviously, in the last week is something, however, that we're taking into account. There are work on a number of sites has been obviously stalled through the lockdown, and so we're having a look at whether there's any impacts that has created that will put pressure on those timelines and what rectifications will need to be put in place. The overwhelming majority of our projects are due to be completed in September, October, November, and indeed I don't foresee any great likelihood or any likelihood that those projects will be put at risk. We've previously identified a couple of projects. I think last year in estimates there were a couple of projects we talked about that the department had under a close watch because they were due to be completed in November or December, and indeed we've been working on that ever since. Just hold on one second. So the 6 where there is absolutely expectation, certainly ahead of the lockdown last week, they were under close watch, but the core accommodation was certainly on track to be completed by the start of Term 1, even if there was potentially landscaping or a car park or something like that that was still going to be worked on. I'll remind the member they were Glenunga. Now, that certainly at the beginning of last week had the core accommodation on track to be completed by the end of 2021, with the car park and landscaping works to be completed in January 2022. Nord Morialta High School, where the core accommodation was due to be completed by the end of 2021. Landscaping, car parks, potentially some work on the sports courts and the facade at the front of the school near the entrance to be completed in February. Playford I'll come back to in a moment because that's probably the most complex one. Roma Mitchell Secondary College is currently forecast to be fully complete by late January 2022, prior to the start of Term 1. That one's in a slightly different circumstance to the other because the member may recall that one was established by the previous government as a PPP. Public-private partnership, and so the sites that the department is responsible for, we have to have the building works handed over, and then we put the furniture in the classrooms and set up the classrooms. At Roma Mitchell, the PPP partner is responsible for that, so that one we've got a little bit more leeway with, but it's as I say, it's currently forecast to be complete on time. The Seaton High School core accommodation is to be completed by the end of 2021. Some landscaping and demolition of no longer used facilities would go into the beginning of next year. And at Unley High School was on track for core accommodation to be completed by the end of 2021, with the covered outdoor learning area structure and all landscape works to be completed in January 2022. So that was the status as it was at the beginning of last week. And we're obviously keeping a very close eye on those to see if the impact of the shutdown has been significant and what mitigation works may need to be put in place throughout the process. There's obviously been a governance board and the Department for Education working closely with the Department for Infrastructure and Transport to identify where there are any risks for those to be accelerated where possible, or for solutions to be put in place so that the Year 7s, as well as the Year 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s and 12s are welcomed at school with the learning spaces that are required. So Playford International College, I should also be clear, we're expecting the learning spaces that are needed to welcome those Year 7s to be in place, with that caveat that I put before. But I thought it would be useful to provide the example of Playford because that's, as I say, the one where there will be some work done next year that won't be required for those core learning spaces, but for some of the specialty facilities. And the issue we've had at Playford has been compounded a bit. First, obviously, they've had the issue of the last week. Prior to that, they had the 3-day shutdown last year on the 19th of November, requiring all non-essential workers to stay at home. They were also impacted by the closure of SA Structural Office for 14 days last year. The SA Structural had been contracted to complete the structural steelworks, which were on the project's critical path. SA Structural entered administration on the 17th of February 2021, and indeed I note that Mossop Construction Interiors were authorised to enter into a new structural steel contract on the 23rd of February. The administrator for SA Structural closure refused Mossop Construction and Interiors access to the structural steel fabrication CAD shop drawings that had been completed by SA Structural for the project. So as a result, the newly appointed structural steel fabricators were required to recommence documentation, which resulted in a 12-week loss in time to the project. So the Department for Education and DIT and the builder have been exploring opportunities to accelerate the construction program. To achieve the requirement to provide those extra spaces for the Year 7 intake, the building contractor has put forward a strategy that the department and the school have endorsed, and that's proposed to split each handover into refurbishment and new build separable portion handovers. So that allows the handover of the refurbished areas in November this year, very much on time. That includes the 17 general learning areas that are required, and indeed 2 service learning areas and workshops. There are 8 spaces which are not required to increase that capacity, but are service learning areas and workshops. They're in a separable portion that is designed to be handed over in March next year. So those existing workshops will be utilised while the new areas are completed. The demolition of those 6 existing general learning areas is currently planned to occur once all new learning areas have been completed. So effectively what we're talking about is probably in the term 1 to 2 school holidays, those particular specialised learning areas, I think it's the tech studies from memory, will go from the older specialised learning areas to a new one. That's not an increase in capacity, that's an upgrade of a particular body of facilities at the school.
Thank you, Minister. And on the same budget line, so what measures are in place should some of these works that you just identified in your answer there not be complete in time for the transition, and by that I mean classroom space, or if for other reasons you mentioned, or the lockdown pushes other projects listed on pages 178 and 179 into 2022 as well. What has the department got in place to make sure, I guess, there are spaces for teaching at all those sites?
I think it's best if I describe this as a contingency, for example, if there was a further statewide lockdown that saw no further construction work, because I don't think we're in a position that... I put the caveat in the previous answer that obviously if there are issues at one of those 6 sites, that might potentially create some challenge, but honestly I'm optimistic that those are going to be okay. So what you're talking about is if there was a further lockdown that prevented construction on site for a certain time. We have obviously the existing learning facilities. Many of these situations are where some existing facilities are being upgraded. So potentially if there's a refurbishment of a classroom, then the existing site is potentially there. There's $13 million worth of demountable facilities, modular facilities that are available potentially for use, and indeed that is available as necessary in response to growth, certainly, but we also have that available for additional capacity to be deployed to schools. But obviously our focus, while we have contingency plans in place, our focus is on delivering the work on time. And if those contingencies need to be kicked in, then we'll look at those as are required at any individual site.
Thanks for your answer, Minister. What is the per demountable cost, or the 13 million that you mentioned? That accounts for how many individual demountables do you or your Chief Executive know?
I have to take that on notice. I note that with the significant investment that the government has made in modular facilities, not only for this body of increased capacity work, but also because there's an increasing use of modular facilities in the broader building program, because they, in some circumstances, in many schools, depending on the layout of the school and the class being provided or the learning area being provided, they can be a more effective, cost-effective way of delivering a project. So that as the capacity in South Australia of building those modular facilities locally has grown dramatically, that's had some positive outcomes on the cost of those facilities. So a modular facility built 2 years ago may well have cost more than one being built to the same capacity today. Just hold on 1 second. If there is further detail that is directly relevant to the member's question, I'll bring it back to the House.
Thank you, Chair. Same budget line, Minister. So the $13 million worth of demountables to which you refer, and I accept your answer that the modular build is a pretty common occurrence now, so this mightn't be a particularly simple question to answer. But how much of that is basically pre-existing stock that is somewhere on a government site in the state? How much is stock that we have either purchased or had ready in case of projects slipping behind for the Year 7 transition?
It's that $13 million figure, and I'll be corrected in a moment if I'm wrong, but I believe that's what we budgeted at the beginning of 2019 for new constructions many of them have been constructed since 2019, and I believe that some may still be in construction in those facilities. Yep. That's right. I'm told that's correct.
So they are demountables that have been constructed since 2019. Are they currently in use somewhere? Is that right? Or some are, some aren't, or we're not sure of their location?
Some have been deployed, some are ready for deployment, noting that some are deployed in primary schools that won't necessarily need them next year either.
Same budget line, Minister. Where are the ones that aren't deployed stored? Where are we keeping those in readiness for being rolled out potentially next year or earlier, I suppose? Really? He does.
I'm advised that that's normally with the manufacturer. We manufacture as we need them.
Same budget line again. Thanks, Minister. Who is the manufacturer that we use? What was the process for choosing the manufacturer, and was there a tender process? What are we looking at per cost? Who were the companies involved in the tender? Sorry, I understand that's a number of questions, not one.
I'll ask the Chief Executive to comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a preferred panel of suppliers, but I just don't have that detail with me. So if I may, I'd like to bring that back for the committee.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to budget page 4, volume 1, page 177. Can the Minister please outline to the committee how the government is supporting students with a disability in their education?
I thank the member for the question. The Department's Inclusive Education Support Program funding model has helped us see greater investment in supporting students with a disability in South Australian public schools than ever before. And to put some figures around that, in 2020, preschools and schools were allocated $305 million for this work compared to $241 million in 2018. That's a 26% increase over 2 years. So if we look at the school component specifically of this expenditure, in 2017, in the final year of the previous government, we saw around $200 million provided directly to schools to support students with a disability or complex behaviour. Over 3 years, that's grown from $200 million to $292 million in 2020. It's a 42% increase in funding going directly to schools to support these students over the life of this government. And I know there's been a 2% increase in the number of students in our schools over that same period. The body of work that has enabled this is the Inclusive Education Support Program. The model of delivering services includes funding students on an individual basis, also funding students as part of a setting, for example, a class or a school. It includes provision of funding for groups of students at a school, for example, the recently announced complexity funding, and services delivered to students that are coordinated by the department, for example, speech pathologists, OTs or psychologists. This program provides funding to meet the individually identified functional needs of each student rather than funding groups of children on the basis of a label or a diagnosis only. It's been underwritten by the government's commitment to the National Education Reform Agreement, which provides funding certainty for the department as funding is based on student numbers with loadings for their capacity. That certainty is so important. Ever since we signed, and I was the first state minister, along with Dan Tehan, the federal minister at the time, at the East Adelaide Primary School to sign that agreement. That is the agreement that has set in stone that the Commonwealth Treasury and the State Treasury will provide funding to the education Education Department to support those extra loadings for students with a disability, rather than the department having to go cap in hand to Treasury after the fact. It gives confidence to the department and to schools in providing that support. In addition to the increasing amount of money being provided directly to schools to support students with functional needs, the number of students with a disability being supported by disability funding has increased significantly since 2017. In 2017, the department reports to me that they provided support to 16,030 students with a disability, while in 2020 that number had grown to 21,116 students. It's a 31.7% increase over the life of this government. And while the vast majority of students requiring additional resourcing have needs that are met at the lower levels of funding, so categories 1 to 3 are between $6,112 per annum to $11,266 per annum, I'm pleased to advise that the introduction of the Inclusive Education Support Program has also led to an increase in the support provided to those students with the highest levels of need. Between 2019 and 2020, for example, the number of students receiving support in the highest categories, so these are categories 7 to 9, and the funding in question is between around $37,378 to $64,970 per annum. The numbers of children in that category have been grown from 731.6 FTE to 817.1 FTE. That's growth from 2019 to 2020 and 11.7% year-on-year growth. So there's been changed funding methodologies with the ISP's introduction since this government's been in place. So it's hard to have an apples comparison with 2017, but I'm advised that there were 317.7 FTE receiving regularised funding at the categories of high level of support, or HLOS, or very high levels of support, known as VLOS. That HLOS and VLOS equates to categories 6 to 9 in today's IESP model, and I note that in 2020 we've gone from 317 FTE to 1,392.1 FTE receiving funding at that level of Category 6 to Category 9. Now, it's in fairness, there were a number of those students who were in those, in addition to those HLOS and VLOS categories under the former government, who were receiving what's known as RAP funding, an individual allocation process, but it's very clear that the introduction of the IESP has seen many times the number of students receiving very high levels of funding with greater levels of certainty, transparency and reliability. Whether we're talking about the total number of students funded, the total funding going straight to schools, or the total number of students funded at the highest levels, the increase in the level of support to students with a disability has been very significant over the last 3 years. Funding is only part of the puzzle, of course, and I'm pleased to see that the department's ongoing work in ensuring that schools are supported in the use of funding enables us to track outcomes from this investment. We also have a very significant body of work underway at the moment to respond to the Graham report, which is very much focused on, of course, on ensuring that we can reduce the increase the inclusion in our schools, reduce the higher levels of exclusion and suspension that have been noted for students with a disability. This isn't a South Australian unique situation. It's not a new situation. It's a challenge for everyone, and the Department for Education is putting a very significant amount of work to a long-term project to support an improvement in that area.
From the member for Badco.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that information, Minister. My question is in relation to these programs, RAP and IESP. In my community, I've had a number of parents and school leaders complain to me about what they see as valid applications through those schemes being rejected, and in particular that they had previously made applications which had been successful and accepted and they received funding, but now the newest applications that they've made have been rejected. I wondered if you could provide some information about how many applications in each of those funding streams have been made and have been rejected, and indeed if you can offer any advice to my school community about why it would be the case that their previously approved applications are now not being approved, and what they might do to ensure that they are getting a fair hearing and a correct result for their applications.
So thank you for the question, and as I've identified, obviously the overall level of support has gone up and the numbers of children with a disability receiving that support, including at the higher levels, has gone up significantly, but it is a complex policy area, so obviously there is a challenge for the system to balance accountability and support, and there's a challenge for schools, obviously, who have this work in supporting their families. So since 2019, there are more than 7,655 additional resourcing requests that have been received from schools and preschools, and around 69% of those have been allocated with additional resourcing. Due to the diversity of disability and the continuum of functional needs students with a disability may present with, the Department has established a statewide centralised panel which includes the teacher peers, principals and discipline-specific experts from within the Department to moderate the provision of additional resourcing. This ensures consistency and equity in the determination of resourcing provided to implement the necessary and reasonable adjustments for improved student outcomes. Teacher judgment certainly forms one part of the overall assessment. We are committed to working with our staff and associations to co-design improvements to the functioning of the system. We always, every day in the work we do, want to improve the work that we do. It's important to remember that under the Inclusive Education Support Program, more students are receiving more funding than ever before. There may well be a number of students, a large number of students, there clearly are thousands of students who were receiving no support previously, who are now receiving support for the first time, and indeed clearly more at the higher levels are receiving support as well. So the accountability mechanisms built into the new funding application process have clearly been balanced by an increase in support and equity around the system. I always invite any particular case that feels that their own circumstances haven't been dealt with appropriately to get in touch. But I have great confidence that the system that has been designed is leading to an increase in support for students.
Can I just add one more thing? I believe that I have sent correspondence to the Minister about this. I will check on that. But is it possible that the Minister could take on notice, maybe getting back to me about a relevant contact within the department so that I can assist those constituents?
Perhaps rather than going through the formal process of taking on notice in this chamber, I will commit to the member for Badco that I will write to her, if I haven't already, to ensure that she has the relevant contact details that she asks for.
Thank you very much.
Chair, thank you, Minister. Back to the previous budget line and demountables. I think we were on Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 186. I think the Chief Executive mentioned that there's a panel of preferred suppliers. Are they all, those companies who are providing the demountable buildings, are they all manufactured in South Australia, do you know? Are they manufactured in different countries?
I'm really pleased that, in fact, the government's program and the way that we've constructed the program has led to a dramatic increase in South Australian supply in this area. Very, very significant increase, and so there's a lot of people working in South Australia on these projects now. I'll invite the Chief Executive to provide some details.
I thank the honourable member for the question, and I will recommit to coming back with broken down detail into numbers and so on. I did get a little bit of information sent through to me regarding the types of manufacturers. So there are organisations like Fleetwood and Osco and so on that we've partnered with in the past. All of those engagements are through a competitive process, but as I mentioned before, they're on a pre-qualified panel, so there's already some pretty good understanding regarding what those average costs are. Largely the cost for a double transportable, which the honourable member would be aware of, and normally with a covered outdoor learning area in the middle, is about $500K. You know, these things have just advanced in their technology and aesthetic as we've gone through it. So back to the 13 million, which was, I can confirm, all new money. Several of those have been deployed because what we're doing is we're trying to sort of map to some of the sort of surge capacity issues that we're having as we're doing the other capital work. So basically we've got students decanting out of an area that we're working on and refurbishing and into some of these temporary transportables that we then redeploy around the system as we require. So, as I said, I'll come back with that further detail regarding individual numbers, the organisations and the procurement method.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister and Mr Pearce, for your answer. If I could stay on the same budget line but move to questions around the Building What Matters branded bunting, which has been erected at school sites. Minister, were you involved personally at all in the selection of which sites would have the Building What Matters branded bunting and fencing erected?
Not that I recall.
Thank you, Chair. Same budget line again. Was any consultation undertaken with school principals whose schools had received the Building What Matters branded bunting before it was erected on their school premises?
I have no doubt that there was discussions that there would be signage of some sort when going back to 2017, in fact, when some of these projects were announced. The detail of what that signage would incorporate, I doubt, was raised with school principals at the time. I suspect it was certainly to be expected. I remember there being signs on schools before the 2018 election already, and in relation to that. Obviously, bunting, or I think hoarding, or whatever it's called, has obviously been up at some schools since then, but I think that's on the building site aspect of it rather than being a matter for the school principal.
Thank you, Chair. Same budget line again, Minister. Was anyone in your office involved in personally selecting or in any way, I guess, influencing which schools had the bunting erected and which schools did not?
So I'm advised that the Building What Matters brand was developed by the state government to inform South Australians on the infrastructure projects planned and the resulting jobs to be created across the state over the next 4 years. And the brand's purpose was to achieve consistent communications for all infrastructure projects across government. So in relation to the member's question about where branding was to be applied and where it wasn't, I'm told that the branding has been applied to any signage developed from the 7th of October 2020 onwards, and existing signage hasn't been replaced. I'm advised traditionally signage is required to be installed by contracted builders in line with standard construction sign template, which includes information such as the builder, the architect, project value, and a review of signage at existing school capital works projects was undertaken during December 2020. I'm advised it was agreed that any new signage would utilise the Building What Matters template for education projects for 12 projects with a value of $10 million and above, with signs that were installed in October and November 2020, that these would be supplemented with a Building What Matters sign, and for projects with a value of $10 million or higher, that fence screening would be used to promote the project and the Building What Matters branding. That's been installed at relevant sites over the course of 2021 by project builders. Each of the 3 new schools had existing fence screening that was not in the Building What Matters brand, and it was not proposed to change this.
Thank you, Chair. So just in relation to the final part of your answer there about those schools that already had some kind of fencing up that was not in the Building What Matters livery or design or whatever you want to call it, so were there any cases where there was bunting from the builders of that particular site that was already erected that was removed and replaced with Building What Matters bunting instead?
Not that I'm aware of, although I've noticed on some projects bunting, hoarding or signage certainly in some cases gets damaged and can be replaced. If there's, I think the end of my question I was specifically referring to the Whyalla, Aldinga and Angle Vale projects though.
For the call.
Thanks, sir. I refer to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 182. Minister, can you update the committee on the government's investment in literacy through the Literacy Guarantee package of measures, please?
I thank the member for Chafee for the question, and it's been a really important part of the work that we've been undertaking since coming to government. The Literacy Guarantee was a package of measures developed in opposition to focus on the critical aspect of education, that is getting the building blocks of language right for our youngest learners, to develop their literacy at a very high level, to use evidence-based techniques to ensure that they're learning to read and write well. And that's been important. And there's a number of measures that have been implemented, and indeed I note that one that I'll probably start with is particularly useful in regional South Australia. So a partnership with Spelled SA, which stands for Specific Learning Difficulties Association of South Australia, an organisation that all members would be very familiar with, and the work they do is very, very important. They've been running parent workshops for a number of years, and most of their parent workshops were in the city prior to the election of this government. We have given them funds to particularly support outreach into regional areas, often in conjunction with work that's being done at schools. And so there's been parent workshops across South Australia in regional areas since that's been in place, since we came to government. Most recently, in this year, workshops have been held in Clare, Port Broughton, Yankalilla, Mount Compass, Nuruyutpa, Aldinga, Mount Barker, Kadina, Udunda, Port Pirie and Tanunda. And further workshops are planned this year in Balaclava, Mount Gambier and Murray Bridge, as well as metropolitan Adelaide. The statewide implementation of the phonics screening check for Year 1 students in government schools, and we've made it available to non-government schools, some of whom use it, has also helped teachers to identify students experiencing learning difficulties so that appropriate interventions can be applied as early as possible. The Literacy Guarantee coaches deliver training in understanding and implementing the phonics screening check to all Year 1 teachers and many leaders prior to the check. These are coaches that are part of the new Literacy Guarantee unit that's been in place since 2018 and which has indeed been expanded over the life of the program. Recently, another 5 full-time equivalents have been identified to commence, indeed have commenced in January, and there are more on the way, which brings the total number to in excess of 20, I believe. Literacy Guarantee coaches have been helping in 168 sites across the public school system. 6 new coaches have been appointed, 12 new sites have been identified, with more to be identified once the results of the latest phonics screening check have become available. The establishment of the Literacy Guarantee Unit has also provided statewide services to schools, including intensive courses of professional learning to over 500 teachers annually to improve teaching practices for students with dyslexia and other learning difficulties. They've got a Train the Trainer professional learning model that will equip those trained teachers to develop the capacities of their colleagues, especially in the teaching of phonics with the support of students with learning difficulties. Direct coaching support for teachers by literacy coaches who need that support, including, again, in the explicit teaching of phonics, and something we're really pleased about, the delivery of Literacy Guarantee conferences, which provide professional development opportunities for both department and non-department sector teachers. There have been 8 of these conferences that have taken place since its establishment. They focus on a whole school approach to supporting students with learning difficulties. Most recently, since the last budget, there have been 3. The 6th conference was live streamed on the 29th of September last year to more than 1,300 participants. The 7th statewide conference streamed on the 14th of January 2021 before Australia Day in the middle of school holidays over the Christmas break, but still attracted 695 South Australian teachers during their holidays. And the 8th one was on the 21st of April this year, 400 face-to-face participants and 200 online. This is a really important body of work, and it's contributed to the uptick in our Year 1's confidence by 20%. So from just over 40% of our Year 1 students getting the expected number of their questions right in the phonics screening check in 2018 to more than 50% in 2019, more than 60% in 2020, and I note within enthusiasm that while not every teacher in junior primary years was an enthusiastic adopter in 2018 of this program, I very rarely go to a primary school these days where the junior primary teachers aren't enthusiastically looking forward to Term 3 phonics screening check this year. Where they're looking forward to seeing those results continue to improve. And I think that the number of whole school approaches for the teaching of early literacy, where all of the teachers are using the same language and confidently able to engage with students with learning difficulties compared to the situation we were in as recently as 3 years ago, it's been a dramatic improvement. And I think that what we're also going to be seeing in the years ahead is not just fewer students reaching those middle primary years with learning difficulties that haven't been given some sort of appropriate intervention, or indeed the key to being able to decode text. We're also going to see the advantage that once you get that early years literacy right, it unlocks the richness of the broader curriculum. It enables children to engage more effectively with the rest of their schooling. And that has massive impacts on broader educational development and behaviour in our schools.
Member Farrar.
Chair. Minister, back to the previous budget line around the Building What Matters bunting. What was the total cost, if you have it, of the Building What Matters bunting being erected across all school sites?
Yeah, sorry, I don't have that here. I'll take it on notice.
Thank you, Minister. And also, I appreciate you may need to take this on notice, but where did that funding come from? Would it come from in existing resources from the agency? Was it new appropriation? Or did it come out of existing money there for the Year 7 transition projects in some cases?
The cost of signage, I think, has always been part of the project cost.
Thank you, Chair. So am I right then, Minister, in saying the total pool of money available across those construction projects, some of which started off as Building Better Schools projects and morphed into the transition of Year 7 into high school projects, came out of the money available for that construction work?
I'm just going to take issue with the construction of the question slightly because, of course, the Building What Matters project had a number of key criteria that informed what the projects would be, and capacity was always part of that. We've maintained those key priorities, but obviously in the high school projects, capacity has been impacted on the fact that Year 7s have been going into high school. In the primary school projects correspondingly, capacity has been less of an intrusion. So the net effect, of course, is that the money is a mix of building capacity and upgrading outdated facilities. And one of the impacts of the Year 7 to high school project has been, of course, that we've did an audit in 2018, 2019 of the facilities in our school and found that to ensure that when the Year 7s came to high school, they didn't just have a classroom to be in, but they also had adequate specialist learning areas, science labs or gyms, or as they may have needed. And one of the things that identified is that many of those high schools were actually coming up short even before the Year 7s were in there. They didn't have the adequate specialised learning facilities for the non-Year 7 students as well. So it's also triggered a further investment of hundreds of millions of dollars extra in our school building programs. And that's not just because of the Year 7 move. We identified that the demographic modelling showed significant amounts of extra capacity required in our high schools. I think from memory it was 20,000 extra high school places required across the public school system in South Australia, about half of which was as a result of Year 7 and half of which was as demographic growth. Now that's not in every high school. There are some parts of Adelaide where there's significant population growth, and there are some parts of Adelaide where the composition of the population has included more high school age children, and indeed some where there's fewer, and some where the choices people are making. I think that there are groups of migrants who came in certain areas of Adelaide in the 50s and 60s and 70s that had a high propensity for choosing non-government schooling, Catholic education or other Christian schools. And waves of migration in more recent times have been more favourable to public education for a whole range of reasons. And it's great to see that confidence in all of our schools. So I don't want to call it the Year 7 to High School building program. I mean, certainly some of the projects have been very significantly influenced by that. Some of them have been influenced by a little. But a $1.4 billion investment in schooling is no small thing. In relation to your question about signage, there was always going to be signage envisaged in all of these projects, I think, in part of the project costs. The thing that changed in October last year, I think, could be categorised as what was going to be on those signs. And we've now moved to having a consistent type of branding across government.
Nothing further. Member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. If I could take you to back to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 178, Investing Expenditure Summary, and some specific questions about the Heights School. Do we have a final figure now on how much of the $10 million that was granted to the Heights School under the Building Better Schools program it has been able to keep for works on their side?
I'll take it on notice and endeavour to get the most useful information I can back to the member. If I could categorise it, when we've, and we sort of talked about this last year in estimates to some extent, when the projects are scoped, there's an agreed scope with the school based on the best endeavours of the department to identify what the project needs for their capacity going forward. And I talked earlier about the audit of the appropriate learning facilities and so forth. And then indeed, once there's an agreed scope of what we believe is the right value, then and those project scopes are developed in collaboration with the school based on advice from the appointed architect and independent cost managers. So that then there's a pre-tender estimate prepared on the final proposed scope. As contracts are awarded through a competitive tender process and following a rigorous evaluation, there are sometimes favourable tender results. So sometimes you have a school that has a project that's been, with best endeavours, valued at $10 million and may indeed, after you get a good tender outcome, might be $9 million, for example, or $8.5 million or $9.5 million. Some come in over. So, of course, where there are some that are coming over, then we work with the school to identify if that scope needs to be value managed in any way. But some of those projects ultimately, whether it's because there's asbestos found or certain regional areas, sometimes there's an issue, sometimes in metropolitan areas there's an issue, sometimes the tenders come in higher and sometimes a bit lower. So there's some scope for the system to support projects through the savings that come from a favourable tender outcome. But we also work with schools if there are things that were value managed to enable to get the pre-tender estimate to a relatively appropriate level. Sometimes the department's able to put things back into their scope if they have come in on a very favourable outcome. So I don't have the detail there because sometimes the final project may well not. The cost may not be finalised until after the project is complete. There's always that risk of other contingencies coming in as well. I'll get, in taking the question on notice, I'll get whatever further information could be useful for the particular school the member's asked about back to the member.
All right.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your answer, Minister. And at same budget line and still in reference to the Heights School, my understanding was that when the $10 million was originally granted to the school under Building Better Schools, the school's intention was to build a double gymnasium because the existing one is dilapidated, basically. And then with the change of government, the direction from your agency was that they also needed to create new classroom space to accommodate what new Year 7s they would have due to the transition, and that with the remainder of the money after that they could build a single gymnasium. But that there was, like you just mentioned in your previous answer, a favourable tender outcome which saw, and I don't have the exact figure, but at least $2 million left over from the 10, which the school then sought to use to renovate the original gym, so they would have 2 gyms. but that money instead has been clawed back into the agency. Is that correct? Is that your understanding of what has happened at the Heights?
A couple of things. I think that the member's description is in the ballpark of accurate, but there's some things I'd correct. Firstly, before the change in government, there were no agreed scopes with projects with any of these schools. The department, under the former minister, had produced these key criteria, of which capacity was one, and schools were invited to identify the projects that they'd like to include. I think Julianne Rietstra would described it to me as a wish list that schools might have of things that they wanted to include, but there was, I was advised on coming into government that there was never any commitment given by the department to any of the schools in relation to any of the specific projects on those wish lists. There were some concept drawings that were produced for the website of what some of those projects might look like, but there was no engagement beyond generating that list of things that the schools saw as desirable. We didn't, as I say, change the criteria, but obviously the impact of Year 7 had some impact on capacity needs in high schools and obviously a beneficial outcome in primary schools. What also, as I think I've stated previously, had a fairly dramatic impact on many high schools was the modelling that showed how many students they would be getting in Year 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. In many cases, dramatic increases in the northern suburbs of Adelaide and northeastern suburbs of Adelaide. Communities such as those served by the Heights, growing confidence in public education was a factor. Many migrant groups who might in previous waves of migration have gone to non-government schools were choosing public education as their first priority. And I'm sure that members who serve communities such as well, actually all of the members in the chamber right now, with high levels of multicultural communities, would be familiar with the different choices that different communities might be prone to making. And so that's having an impact on capacity. 20,000 extra places required in high schools, half of which was to do with the Year 7 move, half of which wasn't. In relation to then the agreed scope that was worked through, there were certainly some impacts, but a priority was to ensure that we had enough spaces in our schools for the children and young people who are going to be coming to our schools. So the characterisation of that, while I disagree that it's just about the Year 7s, it's also about the Year 8s, 9s, 10s and 12s and 11s. That's certainly right. The capacity is a very high priority. And then the other matters that seek to be supported are likely. Once the agreed scope has gone to tender and it's come under, and I don't dispute the members' figures that are apparent at the Heights, then that funding is available to support projects that go over with the projects that have had their agreed scope with the to the identified value. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we've got the final figure, because, of course, the project isn't necessarily finished until it's handed over, and there's always the risk that there are further contingencies that might need to be called on, as has happened at some schools. And I'll just get the Chief Executive to add one final little bit.
Yes, thank you, Minister. We're certainly aware through the principal there, Nigel Gill at the Heights, that was a challenge, and the Governing Council, and I understand that the Governing Council was advocating very, very strongly to be able to retain the full amount and get the best benefit for their school, and I'd be worried if a Governing Council wasn't advocating strongly for their school. So I haven't got the details with me, but I do know that our capital team and our Executive Director of Infrastructure was engaging with the school and the Governing Council, but happy through the Minister to come back and provide some more information to the Honourable Member.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister and Mr. Pearce. So, just in relation to the answers that you both gave there, can I assume then that what was left after the favourable tender outcome at the Heights, that money has gone into another school project elsewhere?
I think that the whole project as a whole, thered be a notional allocation. It wouldn't go from one school to another specifically. There would be a pool of anticipated favourable tender amounts, and that might be offset against a pool of understood unfavourable amounts. At the end of the project, you know, it would be great if the favourable tenders outweighed the unfavourable tenders, which may allow us to provide some funding back to individual schools that might have been on the edge with their outcomes. But this is actually a process where, to the best of my ability, and to ensure that political interference isn't seen to be a consideration, is managed by the department, and I think they do so in an equitable fashion.
I was seeking the goal.
Chair, I refer to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 178. Can the Minister please update the committee on how measures in this budget will support preschools and schools across South Australia, and particularly in my electorate of Newland?
Well, I thank the member for the question, and it's a really exciting time to be an Education Minister when we have a record $1.4 billion worth of capital works being supported through the public education system, and indeed not just work in the public education system, but also support for non-government schools as well. And I know that the Torrens Valley Christian School and in the members' electorate has benefited over the last 3 years from those modest infrastructure grants to support things like the refurbishment and upgrade of some of their capital infrastructure, totalling about $200,000 as well. But there's no doubt that the most significant support has been provided in public education. And the member would be aware that at the Banksia Park International High School, we're well on the way to completing the significant upgrade there, which includes the construction of a new performing arts building, which is looking spectacular with new commercial kitchen attached to it, the refurbishment of existing buildings to provide more contemporary and flexible learning spaces, a new covered outdoor learning area to cover existing courts, and of course the replacement of some ageing infrastructure. At Modbury High School, the $7 million project there is coming into site with an expected completion in September or October. There's a new Year 7 building which will welcome those students next year with additional music rooms, the refurbishment of the wellbeing area and opening up buildings to the courtyard, and indeed the partial refurbishment of the technical studies building, work that the member and I were able to see underway and looking fantastic. And they've also had some buildings that were so heritage, if you like, as to be remembered by grandparents of kids at the school now. They have been removed, and that's been very much welcomed. The Ardtornish Primary School is also benefiting from significant upgrades. So every school and preschool in South Australia has benefited from minor maintenance, minor works grants in the last 2 budgets, and we've seen $50,000 cumulatively provided to every preschool to identify their projects. So at Ardtornish, Banksia Park, the Kathleen Mellor Preschool, Modbury South, Redwood Park, Ridgehaven and St Agnes in the members' electorate, all of those preschools benefited from a $20,000 grant and then a $30,000 grant to do the work, whether it's painting or tiling or roofing or covered out door spaces that was appropriate for their site. Every school has also benefited from grants of between $20,000 and $100,000, depending on their size and whether they had a capital works project. So at Ardtornish Primary, $20,000, Banksia Park International High School, $20,000, and Modbury High School, $20,000, and Modbury West School have received $20,000 each. $70,000 at Banksia Park Arta 7, $60,000 at Modbury South Primary School, $100,000 to the Modbury Special School, $70,000 to Redwood Park, Ridgehaven and St Agnes Primary, and $60,000 to Tea Tree Gully Primary School. Those obviously some variation in enrolments, and those again are grants that are enabled to be provided to whatever is the priority project. Some schools have been combining those grants with work that they've been saving up for, enabling projects to be undertaken more quickly. Some have been in addition to what is already on their track, because of course course, through schools' regular funding. There's a component to that that goes to maintenance, and so some schools were able to put them towards projects that fell into the category of things they'd like to do, rather than just the things that were urgently needed. We've also seen in the members' electorate significant grants to a range of schools to deal with maintenance work that had been reported to the department for some time, but not able to be actioned through the school's regular maintenance budget. So these are ones where the facilities manager had identified a requirement for that asset, and which we've been able to undertake in the last year and a half. So at Modbury High School, $300,000 went towards the replacement of fire main pipe work. Also $220,000 to fixing gutter, eaves and a fascia replacement. Modbury Special School had $350,000 to replace a bitumen driveway that was in need. Modbury West School had $265,000 for a bitumen driveway and car park. St Agnes Primary School, $250,000 to replace the bitumen hard play, and that was a site where I think that basketball court was actually at risk of being a danger to students, and now it's a world-class facility. Tea Tree Gully Primary School also had two projects totalling $260,000 for bitumen car park replacement and repairs to windows. These are all important bodies of work, and they enable the teaching and learning to go in our classrooms, which is, of course, the most important thing to be the priority for our principals. There's always more to do. There's always more schools that need more support, and we as a government have shown our commitment over the last series of budgets to delivering that extra support to schools, and will continue to do so.
Member for Torrens.
Thank you. Budget paper 4, Volume 1, pages 178, 179, 185 and 186. Minister, why has the work on the demolition and rebuild of Hampstead Primary School buildings deemed uninhabitable as a result of a fire in December 2019, that's 18 months ago, not been given a priority, particularly seeing that the children are faced with burnt-out shells on a daily basis, and that some of the programs previously delivered in the school have had to be put on hold?
So I thank the member for the question, and it is an utterly despicable disgrace that anyone would ever set fire to a school. I'm sure all members would agree it's disgusting and really disappointing and very sad. But on the 27th of December 2019, there was a deliberately lit fire at Hampstead Primary. It destroyed a building. It caused significant damage to interconnected buildings, and the current damage estimate is around $3.1 million. The fire started in the major interconnected building complex in the centre of the school, which houses a preschool, classrooms, administration, music and amenities, toilets. Due to the interconnectivity of the building, there was extensive smoke damage and carbon deposits throughout the complex. The fire also destroyed the school's main power switchboard, and there was significant water damage to ICT equipment. I'm advised that during January 2020, Spotless Facility Services arranged immediate fire remediation and repairs to enable the school to reopen for Term 1 with temporary toilets in place, temporary administration areas and offices. Obviously not satisfactory for long-term use, but within a month wanting to get the school in a position where it could be habitable. The insurance assessor then determined that the building could be remediated within its existing shell. Subsequent engineering reports received from Spotless and their contractors indicated that the building was not structurally sound and should be demolished and replaced rather than remediated. A second engineering report was therefore commissioned, given the recommendation did not align with the insurance assessment, which also confirmed the building was not structurally sound. So the second engineering report agreed with the subsequent engineering reports from Spotless, but not with the initial insurance assessment. So, there have been some very unfortunate delays in commencing the replacement of the fire-damaged building, but plans are now being finalised and a schedule will be completed once the works have been tendered. On the basis that more significant construction work would need to be undertaken, the department did provide a temporary dual classroom modular building from Term 4 last year to alleviate space issues at the school. In order to accelerate the project, a request for service was forwarded to the Department for Infrastructure and Transport on the 30th of September last year. Now, I apologise if I mispronounce this. Katanu Party Limited was engaged as an architect. As a fire reinstatement project, the project will deliver new accommodation to replace the spaces destroyed by the fire, such as administration spaces, including a school reception, staff offices, staff and meeting rooms, and other support spaces. It will include a flexible service learning area and covered walkways. The lead architect has investigated the existing site conditions, and due to highly reactive soils, in combination with the existing piled footings, the design is required to include a fully piled structural system. This has been estimated to add 6 weeks to the program, unfortunately. A preliminary cost estimate has been prepared against the proposed scope of works to assist in monitoring the costs of the project. The cost estimate is in the process of being reviewed. The current program prepared by the Department for Infrastructure and Transport forecasts the practical completion of the whole project to occur in the first half of next year, by June next year. However, it is anticipated that this will potentially shift following detailed design and documentation and the submission of tenderers' construction programs. Obviously, we're eager for it to take place as soon as is possible. I'm advised that the principal has been kept up to date, certainly since they brought, I think the member may have even brought to my attention a delay at some stage in the middle of last year from recollection.
That's right.
And so the principal is now aware of the current forecast completion date, but would understandably, and as any principal would like the works completed as early as possible, as would we all. The department's endeavouring to work closely with DIT, the Department for Infrastructure and Transport, to ensure that all project milestones are expedited to the extent possible. There is some replacement facilities on site at the moment, but we would very much like to get to the end of the full project, which will see the school with some fantastic new facilities.
Minister, I raised the issue with you 8 months after the fire, and following that, 2 modules were delivered. But since that time, we're now 18 months. There's been a number of start dates that have been provided to the school, including the July school holidays that we've just had. Now there's another scheduled for October. Can the Minister assure the school, Hampstead Primary School community, that the demolishing of the current buildings and the new buildings will begin during the next school holidays? The kids are being faced every day when they go there with the burnt out shells. Some of these children that go to that school are under the intensive language program, and they actually are on humanitarian visas, and being faced on a daily basis with these burnt out shells is just not good for their well-being.
I'll be very clear. I would very much like this project to be completed as soon as possible. I'll check with my officers as to whether there's any further information I can provide in addition to what I provided in my earlier answer.
Thank you.
And the Chief Executive also joins with me in those comments, I think, and he's assured me that it'll be an absolute priority for him to get this sorted as quickly as possible so that there aren't any further delays.
That would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Refer to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 186. Can the Minister update the committee on how the government's Learning Plus online tutoring program is helping in our goal to improve maths education?
And I think all members would join with me in agreeing that obviously alongside learning to read, numeracy and the mastery of mathematical concepts is absolutely critical for our children's success in learning in their education and in life, and it's an absolute prerequisite for children to take the opportunities that are abundant in South Australia and only growing of jobs and work in fields that require a strong background in STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths. The unbelievable investment by the federal government in defence projects, the dramatic investment by the private sector in the cyber and space industries as a result of the government's curation of Lot 14 is dramatic. South Australia is the national capital of defence projects, and we're rapidly approaching becoming, I think we're on the way to being the Southern Hemisphere capital of cyber and space projects in the years ahead in South Australia. And we want our young people to be able to take those opportunities. So they need a strong grounding in maths. One of the prospects that we have undertaken to try and grasp that opportunity, to try and give our students the best possible start in their maths, is a new pilot program, which we're optimistic about and which we hope will go very well. And that's called, as the member identified, Learning Plus. So the Learning Plus pilot program commenced in Term 1. It provides one-on-one online mathematics tutoring to students in public schools, and those schools are across South Australia metropolitan regional areas. The way it works is students participate in 2 30-minute sessions per week for up to 10 weeks. Sessions can take place outside of school hours, including on weekdays after 4 p.m. and on weekends. More than 100 schools expressed an interest in participating in this pilot program. Because it's a pilot program and we want to establish whether it works and for which cohorts it works most effectively, students selected for the program had varying mathematical abilities in order to evaluate the impact of the program across student cohorts. More than 200 qualified teachers were onboarded as tutors and provided with a comprehensive induction into their new role. We wanted to make sure that this tuition was undertaken by teachers who didn't just have competence but also confidence in maths instruction. The University of Melbourne were engaged to design tutor professional learning and resources, including a diagnostic interview tool that assists those tutors to determine the students' learning requirements. So we're providing the tuition for the students at the level that they need to help them get the growth that they need. Resource booklets for determining mathematical concepts, also from the University of Melbourne, provide tutors with activities that can be completed in an online environment. During Term 1 and 2 school holidays, professional learning days were held for all tutors to deepen their understanding of the mathematical concepts and to learn from each other based on their experiences so far, and we're developing a collegiality between that group of teachers. The program is being delivered online. The online-only approach means that students from across the state can access this program and their participation is not dependent on the availability of a local tutor. It really did come about as one of the outcomes when we were looking for the upsides of COVID, the opportunities, the things that we learnt last year, and particularly at the end of Term 1 when we had those days of professional development last year where our staff became increasingly familiarised with the online environment and some were using it during Term 2, even after students came back to school. The fact that, and I think we saw it in the last week, so many people are now much more comfortable in that online environment. We saw this as an opportunity to provide something else to our students, something that wasn't dependent on where they are, something that ensures that every student in every classroom, in every school, in every town and suburb in South Australia will get that support. So that means that we've been able to provide support across regional and remote South Australia. Schools like Streaky Bay, Kadina, Keith, Penola, Kangaroo Island Community Education have all had students engaged in this pilot. In all, 491 Year 6 students participated in the pilot over Term 1 and 2. We've had good feedback, 99% of the post-session ratings indicating students found the sessions helpful or very helpful. Those are the 2 good categories, I'm told. Feedback from parents whose children completed the program as part of the first Year 6 group has also been positive, with 98% of parents reporting improvements in their child's mathematics confidence, and that, by my Year 6 mathematics, suggests that there were 5 parents who didn't report improvement, although their children found it helpful or very helpful. I don't know what those circumstances of those 5 children were, but I'm sure that they enjoyed the sessions. The first group of Year 8 students commenced tutoring sessions in week 6 of the Term 2, with the second group commencing as recently as last week. There will be a third group of Year 8 students commencing in mid-Term 3. That cohort of Year 8 students spans across 31 schools. So there are 431 Year 8 students currently accessing Learning Plus, in addition to the 491 Year 6 students who've completed their work. And there'll be another 250 Year 8 students starting next month. The Telethon Kids Institute have been engaged to conduct an independent evaluation of the pilot program. Findings from this evaluation will determine whether the pilot program is associated with the increase in student self-efficacy in mathematics and will assist in shaping the future development and implementation of the program. I'm really pleased with the very positive feedback we've received, as I identified earlier, from the overwhelming majority of participants and their parents, and the anecdata that I've received from the tutors and teachers in schools has been useful. But to be clear, the future of this program will be very strongly informed by more than the anecdata. We're interested in the analysis of it being helpful. I'm optimistic that it will be seen to be helpful. I certainly have no regrets about it. I don't think it was a bad use of money in any way. What I actually think is it was a really good pilot program, and I'm very hopeful that the analysis will show that it's worthwhile. And if it is, I've no doubt that we will dramatically increase the scale in future years, enabling more students or more cohorts to take part, and we'll await that advice. But I think that the Year 8 students who are currently undertaking the program, I hope they find it useful, and I hope that they have significant increase in confidence and agency in their maths skills in the months and years ahead. I should say, sorry, this was a body of work undertaken by some outstanding people in the Department for Education, both with background in maths and in professional development, and I commend all of the people involved with this program, the teachers and the administrators and the officers for this body of work.
Volume 1, page 178. Will the zone for the proposed Ross Trevor School, once that is announced, affect the shared CBD zone?
I'll indicate that in relation to this, as it's a part of my electorate, I'll probably get the Chief Executive, one of the other departmental officers, to answer most questions in relation to this, because I've been very conscious to follow the advice of the department where there might be any perception that my electorate might be an issue. But in relation to this specific question, the answer is a very clear no.
Thank you, Chair. Can you rule out, Minister, any further suburbs or parts of suburbs being removed from the shared CBD zone?
The Chief Executive have advised that there's no plans to change the CBD zone being prepared by the Department for Education, and I'm certainly not aware of any plans being developed by anyone else.
Thank you, Chair. On the same budget line, Minister, so are there any, if, as your answer suggested, that whatever the new Ross Trevor School zone will be won't affect the shared CBD zone, what plans do you have to address the pretty obvious capacity issues in that shared CBD zone?
Specific information from the member. On me. So obviously we've had capacity challenges in those CBD zones for some time. The Adelaide High School and the Adelaide Botanic High School share a zone. This has been led to the opposition, as we then were when I was first a candidate in 2008, 2009, arguing for a second campus in the CBD. That was eventually delivered, and the school started in 2019 at Adelaide Botanic High after a series of elections that eventually saw that work put into place. So the zone reduction that took place in 2020 as a result of the CBD schools exceeding their original forecasted demand for places, and took place in 2020, and the members are aware of that. Both CBD schools exceeded their enrolment ceilings again in 2021, resulting in the need to develop strategies to accommodate a double cohort in 2022, notwithstanding obviously that there was very significant investment in increasing the size of Adelaide High School that we announced in 2019 to meet the challenge of Year 7s going into the school. And so Adelaide High School's significant increase in capacity will be in place from the beginning of next year as a result of that. So capacity management plans are in place for both schools at the moment, restricting enrolment eligibility for out-of-zone students. As I say, additional capital works at Adelaide High School will establish additional general learning areas for next year's. Both schools are redeveloping their timetables to maximise utilisation of existing teaching spaces, including timetabling staggered start and finish times for specific year levels and areas of study, i.e. practical teaching areas. Places for international fee-paying students at Adelaide High School will remain capped at 75. Currently there are 40, and I don't anticipate that growing anytime soon. And consideration is currently being given to a number of options for meeting enrolment demand in the CBD and the inner north.
Paper 4, Volume 1, page 186. What is the current status of the $5 million infrastructure project first promised back in 2017 for Black Forest Primary School?
Allocation remains, and the school will be, I believe, is working with the department on the scope of that at the moment, and the detail I'll further take on notice and bring back whatever further details are up to date.
Thank you. The school had previously been informed of what the scope of the works was, and indeed you were talking about artist impressions earlier. There were artist impressions that were available to the school about what might be built there. And could you inform us as to what was in the original scope and whether that is still what's intended to be built, or whether the project is getting re-scoped in terms of, when I say scope, I'm talking about, are there classrooms, are there outdoor learning areas, what is actually going to be involved in that $5 million build?
So if I can perhaps restate from the earlier answer to, I think, the member for Wright's question, there was no scope agreed between the department and the school prior to the election, is the very clear advice I've had from the department. I had when I came into government as the minister. I'm advised that effectively they put the drawings ahead of the scope. There was a wish list, as I understand it, that schools identified the projects that they were interested in. I'm not sure if somebody told the school that there were projects that they would specifically get.
It was on the education website.
Yes, I'm advised that there was the wish list put on the website and the pictures that were drawn by the former government, but I am advised by the department that there was never an agreed scope with any school over what was going to be delivered within the budget. The wish lists, and this is the way it was described to me when I became the minister, were projects that were identified by the school that they would like to have in the project, but the costing that they would done, that work hadn't yet been done, and so to the member for Badco's example, I think Black Forest Primary, there was an allocation of $5 million that was announced in 2017. Then schools were asked to identify a wish list of what they wanted, and then the work on identifying how much would those things cost and hadn't yet been done. And after that, it was proposed that they would work out which bits would be delivered that were in the priority areas that were within the $5 million envelope. Now, the drawings that were put on the website by the former government were not reflective of an agreed scope, as I understand it. They were reflective of something to put on the website and something to tell the school community about, as I understand it. I've just received some information about Black Forest's specifics. I'm told it's in the concept phase, which should be completed in the next few weeks. I'm not advised that there are any known scope issues. The department's working with the school on new classrooms and new multi-purpose spaces, and obviously there'll be more detail available in a few weeks in relation to that particular project.
Thank you. Could you tell us if the budget of $5 million remains the same and what the new delivery timeframe is for the project?
The budget is the same at the moment. The delivery timeframe. I'll take the delivery timeframe on notice in the hope that by the time the estimates answers are due to be supplied, we will actually have that, because the delivery timeframe depends on the final scope, which is, as I say, a few weeks away.
Thank you very much. Minister, does the expansion of South Road have any bearing on this particular project, that is the $5 million to be spent on additional infrastructure? And if so, what impact does it have, either on the end product or indeed the planning phases of this infrastructure project?
Is in relation to that the Department for Infrastructure and Transport are finalising the reference design still, so I don't have anything further to add other than that I understand the Department for Infrastructure and Transport has been working with the Department for Education to mitigate as much as practicable any impacts to these schools, which may be none, is one of the possibilities there, and that the Torrens to Darlington, which I believe the Department for Infrastructure and Transport refer to as the T2D stakeholder engagement team, is working closely with this department to ensure schools and their communities are as informed as possible and have the opportunity to provide feedback to the project team. And obviously I imagine then if there is any impact, the community will be advised as soon as that is determined. It may well be that there is not.
I realise you may need to take this next question on notice given your previous answers, but the information that's in the public realm for my community is that the reference design is due in December this year, and the information you've provided is that we'll have some sort of idea of what's happening with this $5 million project at Black Forest in the coming weeks. Is there what impact might that have if we don't have a reference design until after this work? Initial work, planning work, is done on Black Forest Primary Schools project?
I thank the member for the question, and I understand the question. I'm advised that the buildings that are proposed for Black Forest are away from South Road, and so even if there was any impact of the South Road project on the school, it wouldn't impact on the proposed building works. That's not to say that there will be an impact from the road on the school. There may well not be, but even if there were, my understanding is I'm advised that the building project, we are absolutely confident, would not be impacted by that change with the road.
Can I continue with Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, take the Minister to page 177. Can the Minister please update the committee on developments, the government's music education strategy since it was launched?
Thank the member for the question, and I'm really pleased to have a moment to talk about the music education strategy. I think music in schools is something that is asked about at most estimates committees. And since 2018, when I launched the department's music education strategy. I've been really pleased at the way that it has been delivered by the department. Its aim is to ensure all children and young people in South Australia have access to high quality music education. We know that music in our schools is one of the things that helps to engage our students, that music brings joy to classrooms, it brings joy to schoolyards when people hear it. I was told by some of the contractors when I visited the building works at Henley High not that long ago with the chair of this committee, that the builders at Henley High enjoyed hearing the instruments play from the students in the classroom next to the edge of the building site. I'm not sure whether the students in the classroom enjoyed the building work sounds, but I think they were coping pretty well and holding their own in producing that level of music. I digress. The strategy aims to enhance existing systems and build capacity to provide better support for general classroom music education. It aims to upskill non-specialist teachers and educators to improve the delivery of general classroom music education. It aims to provide curriculum resources with a strong focus on primary schools. A South Australian quality music education framework was launched in 2020, defining a set of characteristics for quality music education and providing guidance to a range of stakeholders involved in making decisions around music education. Field officers have established music engagement networks, providing direct mentoring to 217 school and preschool educators and facilitating professional development to 845 participants since 2018. 3 rounds of the Music Innovation Fund have been completed, with more than $700,000 allocated to 75 schools, 22 preschools and 7 external organisations. These projects have varied from the small to the very large, from the purchase of music instruments to professional development programs, to whole school approaches to music, to the introduction of new trial ways of embedding music in the everyday life of the school. And I really commend all of those teachers, both music teachers and general teachers around the system, who have taken the opportunity provided by this fund to introduce a new musical program in their school. It's seen some dramatic improvements and opportunities. A music education advisory panel was established in 2019, convening once per term. This has some very high quality people who are giving their time to the Department for Education to support our students, and I thank those people for their work, in particular Vincent Ciccarello from the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra and Graham Kerner from Adelaide University, who were also deeply embedded and engaged in the development of the strategy in the first place and have maintained that involvement in an ongoing way because they see its value to the state, and that's a service to the community. I thank them for. In 2021, an online music education resource has been offered to all government schools with primary enrolment, and 188 sites are registered. We're currently developing, indeed, a scope and sequence for music education has now been completed, with units of work currently in development for release in September this year, which will further give guidance to teachers using the Australian curriculum in a way that will deliver more music in our schools. Working in collaboration with 3 South Australian musical associations, 3 music education professional development packages were delivered in 2020 with 60 teachers and preschool educators participating. I thank all of them, and I commend the work done by all of these music educators and non-music educators who are embedding music in their practice for their work. I think it's adding a lot in our schooling system.
The member for Badco.
Budget paper 4, volume 1, page 186. Have you or your department proposed or investigated a proposal from the Forestville and Ashford communities for a new school on the old Lacornu site at Forestville? I understand there has been some correspondence to your government from community members who'd like to see a school on that site, and I'm just inquiring as to whether that is being considered, and if so, what action has been taken by your government on that front.
I'll take it on notice. I could provide you with some general information, but I think to enable the specifics of engaging with that particular community group to be taken into account, I'll take it on notice and we can have some more questions now.
Thank you very much. Richmond Primary School, you may be aware, has a shortage of staff parking, which causes quite a lot of problems. A number of staff get parking fines quite frequently there. That has been a problem for a few years, and I and others have made representations to the council and the government. What steps have been taken, if any, to accommodate staff parking at Richmond Primary School?
Again, I'll take that one on notice so that we can deal with the specifics rather than just talking about the generalities, which briefly, obviously, there's a significant level of car parking responsibility that is taken by council, but acknowledging that there's been correspondence, I'll take it on notice and deal with the specifics when we get back.
Thank you very much. In relation to Edwardstown Primary School, the school has been raising issues with road safety on the roads that surround the school. I believe it has had some action from the council in relation to some plans for pedestrian crossing or road safety infrastructure on one road. However, they're still concerned about the other surrounding roads. Are you and the department aware of that, and are any steps being taken by the department to address road safety issues for parents, teachers and students at that school?
I'll take that on notice.
Thank you very much. Plympton International College at Plympton has been named publicly in the media a few times for having one of the most unsafe pick-up and drop-off areas for that school, including in an RAA study, I think it was about 2 years ago. What steps have been taken to look at safe drop-off and pick-up at Plympton International College, particularly seeing as that school is a growing school and I understand will reach capacity next year? Thank you very much. Thank you. Still on the same budget line and returning to the issue of South Road, have you been advised of any compulsory acquisition of land at either Black Forest Primary School, Richmond Primary School or Warrior Pendy in relation to the Torrens to Darlington project?
I'm advised that we haven't been advised of that, no.
Have you been provided with any timeline as to when you might be advised of that?
And on the work that's being done on that project, I doesn't presume that there will be, but there's certainly been no advice to this stage that I'm aware of. Thank
you. In relation to that $5 million infrastructure project at Black Forest that we were discussing earlier, can you give any reason for the delay in that project going ahead? Obviously, it was announced by the previous Labor government in 2017, and then I've been told that work has been going on under this government to plan for that for some time. Obviously, it's now 2021. That seems like quite a long time for the school community to be waiting. I just wondered if there was any specific reason why that project was either deprioritised or why it's facing a delay.
The former government announced a 6-year body of work, and we remain within that 6 years.